A slave auction in 2017. Think about it. The video aired last week on CNN confirming what had come out in a long stream of reports and testimony out of Libya, that people were preying on sub-Saharan migrants to sub-Saharan Africans trying to make their way to Europe, a nation with rival governments and a whole myriad of militias. Has been the subject of lawlessness since the 2011 fall of Muammar Gaddafi, but this reportedly happened no further than the capital Tripoli. After the outrage that's seen demonstrations and the recalls of ambassadors, what next? What more should be done? The case highlights the vulnerability of an estimated 390,000 migrants who've made the perilous journey to Libya in the hopes of reaching Europe. Europe, which is working with local authorities in Libya to prevent them from crossing the Mediterranean. And if EU citizens don't want to welcome more refugees and migrants, Germany's recent elections prove that, does that mean that Europe's leaders have to instead sort out Libya? We're going to be asking about the first plans to screen asylum seekers in places like Niger and Chad. What is the grand plan when it comes to migration flows? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at those that are enslaved in Libya. And joining us from Rome, Italian Member of Parliament Lia Quartapelle from the ruling Democratic Party. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Here in the studio, we're joined by human rights attorney Selina, the founder of notaweaponforwar.org. Of war, excuse me. Not a weapon of war.
Thank you.
From Milton Keynes in England, Gouma El Gamadi, member of the Libyan Political Dialogue Group. Thank you for joining the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, and we're going to be joined with more guests from London and elsewhere. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, #F24debate. Burkina Faso is the latest country to recall its ambassador to Libya. The outrage, no surprise, on a continent that's still paying the price of the millions sold into slavery over the centuries. Clément Bonnereau has more.
The latest reaction from Antonio Guterres, condemning images which have sparked global outrage.
Good morning. Slavery has no place in our world, and these actions are among the most egregious abuses of human rights and may amount to crimes against humanity.
Guterres' comments come 4 days after the release of this report by US broadcaster CNN, which shows young African men being auctioned off as farm workers in Libya, some going for as little as $400. The video has triggered a wave of protests. Hundreds demonstrated outside the Libyan embassy in Paris this weekend. African leaders, meanwhile, have also expressed outrage. Mali has recalled its ambassador to Libya, and Niger has urged Tripoli to, quote, do everything possible to stop the practice. A call also made by the leader of the African Union.
On behalf of the African Union, I express my outrage at the despicable migrant slave trade taking place in Libya. I firmly condemn this practice from another era.
Libya said on Friday it was opening an investigation into reports of slavery. France, meanwhile, has announced it will take in 25 migrants who were evacuated from Libya to Niger by the UN last week after suffering abuse at the hands of traffickers. It's estimated there are 700,000 to 1 million migrants in Libya.
Let me begin with you, Selina. Are you surprised when you saw that video?
Unfortunately, no, I'm not surprised. I mean, it's shocking because we can't expect something like that, but it's nothing surprising about what's going on in Libya. So no, I think all people who worked in Libya are not surprised or in any manner. And, 3 weeks ago, beginning of November, Cécile Allegra, a journalist, she published an investigative article in Le Monde, talking about rape, and since I'm working on sexual violence in conflict, and which is widespread in Libya, and also we don't talk about that. So no, there is nothing surprising, and I hope maybe, it's going to wake up the world, what we have seen a few days ago, I hope.
Let me get the reaction now of Gaim Kibre, Director of Refugee Studies at London South Bank University. Thank you for joining us from the UK capital. How did it come to this?
Well, the reason why it came to this is due to many interrelated factors. First of all, there is a total break of rule of law in Libya. There is no state, a functioning state, and the EU member states are solely preoccupied with a single issue, and that is stemming the flow of migrants and refugees from Libya across the Mediterranean Sea. As long as the flow is stemmed, they don't seem to care how it happens and what happens to those who are stopped from progressing their journey towards Europe. So there is a horde of people who are stuck in Libya and at their complete mercy of smugglers in the absence of functioning state. So they are selling people, they are auctioning people, they are raping women, they are violating their rights, and nobody seems to provide redress against these violations.
Lia Quartapelle, what should European governments do?
Well, I'd like to turn the narrative the other way around. We have a problem with Libya. It is a problem that has gone on for many years, even during the Gaddafi regime, of people being smuggled through the desert. With the Arab Spring, the situation became a lot worse, and we saw hundreds of thousands of people being traded across the desert and then across the Mediterranean. The problem is there. Libya is a big black hole at the end of what is a demography explosion in Africa. By 2030, we should have double the amount of people that we have that we had only 10 years ago in Africa, that is 2 billion. And by the end of the century, we will have 4 billion people. So it's clear that if you have a black hole, and if you don't tackle the issue of poverty and inequality in Africa and between Africa and Europe, you will have a bigger problem growing every day. This is the main issue that we don't want to see, and we always keep saying European governments have only one problem, stopping people from coming. Of course, that is part of the problem, but the problem is twofold. One is Africa, underdevelopment, poverty, and demography. And the second problem is the fact that Libya is a failed state, so it cannot control its borders. Then, there we have the horrible images that we saw in the film by CNN. For the first time, we have documented images of what is happening in Libya, because finally we are working with the Libyan government to understand and then to face with measures what is happening in Libya. But it's nothing new. It's something that has gone on for years, and it's something that has deep roots. And so only focusing on the fact that European governments don't want migrants anymore is just talking, but it's not focusing on the main issue and trying to find a solution to it.
Sure, and we'll talk later about the important issue that you mentioned of what's the bigger picture when it comes to migration flows. But let's talk about the urgent problem at hand, and those, as you say, those images now coming to light. What reaction should there be? You mentioned cooperation with the Libyan government. Well, first of all, which Libyan government, and what kind of cooperation can there be going forward?
From here, from Rome, what we are doing is that we are going through a parallel process. On the one hand, there is the national unity government process. Of course, It is not a satisfactory process. Of course, we are not getting to an agreement as fast as we would like to. But today, for example, we had the parliament in Tobruk saying that they agree with the UN Special Envoy proposal on the future of Libya. So we should really get to a national unity government that delivers for all the Libyan people. And this is the political process. On the other side, we have to work with the Libyan authorities, either the mayors or the UN-recognized international Libyan government, in order for them to be able to contrast smugglers. These are the two things that we are trying to do. Of course, the process is imperfect. We're not getting the results we would like. It is a process that will last for years. But this is the only way that we can tackle the issue, a credible commitment to Libyan unity and to strengthening the capacity of Libyan authorities to contrast smugglers.
All right. Earlier, Selina Bardet was mentioning the investigative filmmaker Cécile Allegra, who published that expose in Le Monde on the plight of migrants stuck in Libya. She joins us now from Tuscany. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. Cécile, what can be done in the immediate after those images? I'm not talking about the big picture, the long run, etc. I'm talking about what can immediately be done.
Well, what can be immediately done is to stop the campaign against the NGO that rescue migrants in the Mediterranean to begin with. And we are very aware that the Italian government has sent and has sold boats to the Libyan coast guards. And those same boats are now attacking the NGOs that are rescuing migrants that are sinking in the Mediterranean by numbers that we cannot
when
even
you say
begin
attacking,
to imagine now.
What do you mean? Attacking the NGO boats, how?
Well, I think you must know that several boats have been attacked with gun machines. The Pro Arms boat has been attacked with gun machines, has been drawn to Tripoli back by force by a Katiba in Tripoli. They wanted them to actually enter the territorial waters of Libya, and they threatened to kill everybody unless the captain of the boat would follow them. And so they did, and in the meantime, they desperately tried to reach Rome and the Senate and the MPs and try to alert them of this situation, and nobody came to rescue. So eventually the situation was resolved, but it was very serious for all the humanitarians working on board. So, and this is not the first time that this happens.
Not the first time.
So,
and specifically now, what do you do with the militias, with the governments, the rival governments? Do you engage with them or do you sanction them?
Well, it's not my position to say. I can only deliver a very personal opinion. I think that the various European governments have a variety of interests. I'm just saying the obvious. And those interests lead them to actually make agreements with the current governments. Should we tomorrow discover that they are responsible and related directly to the human trafficking networks, what would we do? If we would be to discover that we are currently talking to people who are actually economically benefiting from this unhuman traffic. So I'm just stating the obvious here. It's a question of realpolitik, as always, and we must be very careful because it's very touchy and a delicate position that is really engaging us for the
very
future.
delicate. We're going to pick up on that point. We have to take a very quick break. We'll be right back. You're watching the France 24 debate.
My name is Jessica Saltz and I'm the Berlin correspondent for France 24. You can find my coverage of German news from here in the capital and beyond on France 24's news programmes and also online at france24.com.
Jessica Saltz, one of the 160 France 24 correspondents around the world. Encore, presented by Eve Jackson.
This is a region few travellers visit, a place that for centuries has been the centre of tension and the land fought over. But this tiny area packs in more historical, religious and cultural heritage than perhaps anywhere else in the world. Join us from the Palestinian cities of Bethlehem and Ramallah as we discover an art scene that's full of hope and resistance.
Encore on France 24 and France24.com. Anticipate. Take a stand. Be mobile. Defend your position. Be independent. Meet every challenge. Surprise people. Be a leader. Be equipped to understand the world. France 24.
Welcome back. Before we resume the France 24 debate, our top story on the 21st of November 2017, the resignation of the only president Zimbabwe has known since independence, Robert Mugabe, who sent a resignation letter to Parliament some 3 hours ago.
I want to notify you of the following. I have received, in terms of Section 96, subsection 1 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, a letter from the President, State House, Harare, Zimbabwe, 31st November 2017. The Honorable Jacob Mondenda, notice of resignation.
Scenes of jubilation in the capital, Harare, and throughout Zimbabwe. The Speaker of Parliament interrupting impeachment proceedings. Mugabe may have been out by as early as Wednesday without that resignation letter. For many who are celebrating, Robert Mugabe is the only leader they've ever known.
Today is an independence for us, Zimbabweans. We are happy.
Waiting in the wings, the recently ousted Vice President Emerson Mnangagwa, former right-hand man of Mugabe, who was forced to flee a couple of weeks back. He could very quickly be the one taking over, say officials inside of the ruling ZANU-PF party. France 24 spoke earlier to Guinea's president, Alpha Condé, who's the rotating president of the African Union.
What we would like is for the transition not to replace the elections. I think there will be elections next year. The transition is only a step towards these elections. We're going to communicate on this issue and agree with the Southern African Development Community. We don't want the same person in charge of the transition to be a candidate in the 2018 elections.
We'll have more on Zimbabwe with Laura Silly at the top of the hour. Time now to go back to the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. The world shocked to discover those images of a slave auction in Libya's capital, Tripoli. African migrants trying to make their way to Europe, who are abused, in some cases forced to work for free. And in this case, that slave auction, which was broadcast first by CNN, sending shockwaves. The UN Security Council talking about it this Tuesday in New York. With us to talk about it from Rome, Italian member of Parliament, Quartapelli from the ruling Democratic Party. Welcome back as well to human rights attorney Selina Bardet, founder of notaweaponofwar.org. From Milton Keynes, Gouma El Gamadi, member of the Libya Political Dialogue Group, Gaim Kibraid, Director of Refugee Studies at London South Bank University, and Cécile Allegra, investigative filmmaker who has been tracing those human trafficking routes and who is with us from Tuscany. Last week, the UN's human rights chief, just before the break, Cécile was talking about, well, what she considered the complicity of Europe in some cases, or at least the ambivalent role played by the Europeans. Last week, the UN's human rights chief accused the European Union support for the Libyan Coast Guard as leading to the arbitrary and indefinite imprisonment of migrants in, quote, inhuman conditions. Now, back in July, Italy's prime minister hailed the EU's anti-trafficking mission as a success.
What we adopted is almost exactly what we were asked to do by Libya's government. I think this must be considered as an important step in helping Libyan authorities continue their struggle against human trafficking and their ability to control their borders.
Let me begin with you, Gouma El Gamadi. Do you welcome what's called Mission Sophia or Operation Sophia, the EU anti-trafficking mission that's helped to train Tripoli's Coast Guard while Italy supplied it with patrol boats and sent millions of euros? Do you welcome it, or are you ambivalent about it?
Well, let me first of all say that Colonel Gaddafi, who was a very close friend and a big supporter of Mugabe, went on to rule Libya for 42 years, much longer than Mugabe. And then when we toppled him, we found that he left us a country with a big mess, a country where he squandered not billions, but trillions of its rich resources and money, country with no institutions, a failed state. Now, remembering that, it is very difficult for the Libyans at the moment, which government it is, as we are going through a transition, as we are trying to shed the legacy of Gaddafi and move on to build a proper state, it is very difficult to cope with a migration problem, which is basically and essentially is not a Libyan problem. It's a global problem. This migration problem goes back as far as the year 2000, 17 years. And remember, Gaddafi used it as a tool to manipulate Europe. And you remember, or some of your guests will remember very well, the agreement Gaddafi struck with Berlusconi in 2008. And part of it was for Gaddafi to stop the flow of migrants from Libya to Italy. Now, I say it's not a Libyan problem. Why? Because all these migrants, they come from sub-Saharan Africa and they come from countries like Bangladesh and others. They are not Libyans. And the only reason why they use Libya is because Libya is the most convenient route. It is the nearest crossing point to Europe. Lampedusa, an Italian island, is only 300 kilometers away from Tripoli. So it is the geography and the convenience that made those migrants choose Libya. Now, when we have a Libya, which is a vast country with huge borders, with a broken down state, with a failed state, you don't expect the Libyans to be responsible and cope with the problem, as one of your guests just now said, or maybe Gentileoni said, that they should control their borders. How do you expect us to control our borders when you are actually paying, Italy has been paying militias money to stop the migrants crossing from the Libyan shores to Italy?
But you'll agree, Gouma, that there's no excuse for having a slave auction in the capital, Tripoli.
Well, if you want me, let me deal with that point, which is a very important point, please, and give me time. This news, the CNN clip, is absolutely shocking. It is unacceptable. It is condemned, and it is not a practice that we Libyans believe in or do or engage in. Okay? So, and it should be investigated, and those responsible should be brought to justice. There is absolutely no qualms about that. However, I say that it's not only migrants who suffer, tens and hundreds of thousands of migrants who enter Libya illegally suffer. The Libyan population at large are suffering. Let me explain to you another practice that goes on for Libya, and this might shed a light on what happened with the CNN clip. Libyans are being kidnapped for ransom. And we had this over the last few years. And the kidnappers, what they do is sometimes they sell the kidnapped to another kidnapper who can demand a higher ransom. It happened to some of my relatives. It happened to Libyan businessmen. A kidnapper kidnaps a Libyan businessman and then pass him on to somebody else, another kidnapper who can secure him, who has better abilities to keep him safe. And then the other kidnapper can demand a much higher ransom. People were sold to others for $10,000 so that the other Libyan kidnapper can demand $100,000. So this is a practice. Now, do you call this slavery, or do you call this selling on a ransom on somebody who has been kidnapped and denied his freedoms?
Let me bring in on this, Leah Quartapelle. We've been talking about the situation, how it's come to this with this Operation Sophia, most notably. You heard there Guma El Gamati recall 2008, that agreement between Silvio Berlusconi and Colonel Gaddafi. Is this, in a way, ransom money that's being paid to the Libyans? That's the criticism that's been made, Leah Quartapelle. Ransom money that's been paid, well, to keep the migrants from coming?
Well, for what I think we should talk about the present, not about the past. And for the present, we heard your Libyan guest saying that there is a situation of great difficulty in Libya, that not only the migrants but also the Libyan people are actually suffering, and that it's difficult for the Libyan authorities to control the borders. Now, what we're trying to do, and I know it's not...
Leah Quartapelle, I'm going to have to interrupt you, unfortunately, because we have to breaking news, and we're going to have to go to Cairo. And the Lebanese Prime Minister, Saad Hariri, who is speaking after leaving France.
I will be talking about this evening.
All right, apologies for that. Leah Quartapelle, we were talking before the interruption about the situation now, and again, the question was the current deal where Italy provides funding, where the EU backs the training of the Libyan Coast Guard, whether that is akin to what Silvio Berlusconi did in his agreement with Colonel Gaddafi to keep the migrants from coming to Italy.
Well, I have to stress the fact that our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, our embassy in Libya, have all suggested that they're not paying any militia. And so this is important to say. We are providing means to the Libyan recognized government and to the local authorities recognized by citizens in order for them to do two things. On the one hand, to restructure a functioning state, also with coast guards and with border guards in the south. And on the other hand, we are providing means so that you have development projects in order to contrast the fact that without a functioning economy and without a functioning state, the only economic option available is smuggling. This is what we're doing, and we're trying to do it alongside with the Libyan recognized authorities, either internationally by the UN or locally by the Libyan citizens. Of course, the process is far from perfect. Your guest before from Tuscany was suggesting that there have been a few instances which we know of. She was suggesting several, but then she made an example of just one. And there have been a couple of other instances which we know of problems between the Libyan Coast Guards and the NGOs or with detention camps. And what we saw in the CNN film is actually a horrible image of what is happening in Libya. But as your Libyan guest was suggesting, we have to have the Libyan authorities persecute those people, and it is very good that a Libyan tribunal yesterday indicted those people and went after those people selling off human beings. I think the only way forward is to have Libyans in charge of their destiny, and so a functioning state, functioning apparatus, functioning institutions, in order for them to contrast human trafficking. This will take time, and it will never be a perfect scenario. But we would like to be on the side of the Libyan people, on the side of the Libyan authorities to help this process, because we think we have a responsibility. Other European countries are just looking and doing nothing. I personally think that we should also promote a European initiative in order for the Libyan detention centers to be evacuated by the people that are there. We should do more. We are trying to do a lot. The Pope himself said publicly that the Italian government is doing more than what is expected from a single government. We are waiting for other partners to come and share the responsibility, because Libya, it's an issue that concerns all of Europe. Libya borders directly with Europe.
Cecilia Allegra, do you agree that Italy's doing the best it can under the circumstances and that it's shouldering too much of the burden?
No, I'm not agreeing with that. I'm very sorry. I'm not a politician, but I can tell you that, of course, it's obvious that everyone wishes that Libya comes out of chaos and finds finally a unity and can be able to get rid of the traffickers. But the policy that we have implemented in Europe has participated in making this trafficking grow in a way that we've never seen before. I was 4 years back in the Sinai Desert, where the initial torture camps for migrants were, and the Egyptian government, which is much more stronger, led a military operation that lasted for 2.5 years before it was able to eradicate completely all the area, all the torture camps that were in the area of the Gaza Strip, near to the Gaza Strip. So, and this was the will of one country. We have no will whatsoever, I don't think so, to help Libya in itself. We have the will to push back the migrants, and that's the reason why we are helping Libyans, and everyone has an interest in that, where the Libyan, and I do agree with your Libyan guest, are struggling with a very harsh situation in which Libyans themselves are being kidnapped, held hostages for years, tortured, raped, and released eventually, but sometimes not even released. So it's you have to imagine the immense chaos. You know, you drive 500 meters and the militia changes and you're not safe anymore. So how do you want to help protect the borders, so to speak? You know, there is no border. There is only a huge chaos, and you can certainly not help the Libyan Coast Guard defending the border in this particular moment. One has to, but I agree with the European initiative of evacuating the detention centers, but then where should we put the people? Because right now Macron has initiated, discussions to maybe find some hotspots and place some hotspots south of Libya, Chad, Niger, we don't know where, but certainly always not in Europe. And nobody discusses about what if we open the possibility for a flight trip, and we can make waiting lists, and we could conceive another way that doesn't make this mafia grow stronger and richer, because that's what's happening.
Let's talk about Emmanuel Macron's plans. France's refugee agency, the OFPRA, on Monday announcing a plan where they'd already targeted some 25 asylum seekers, 25, men, women, and children, currently housed in Niger's capital with an eye to coming here. The president himself tweeting. Here's what he had to say. It's just been first to Chad, then to Niger to protect refugees, including those evacuated from Libya. I call on our partners to join France in this mobilization to prevent the horrible abuses suffered on migrant routes. The beginning, you have to start somewhere, of these hotspots to process refugees before they, or asylum seekers before they come to Europe. Your reaction, Selina?
No, I mean, I was smiling because, okay, it's a good initiative, definitely. But when you look at, reading, okay, we're going to take care of 25 people, versus the situation, it's kind of
according
ridiculous.
to UNHCR, it's 3,900 migrants in Libya.
Yeah, I think I'm not even sure about the exact number. And
390,000. Excuse me, I got my decimal points wrong.
But I'm not. That's also a point. Actually, I wanted to say we are not even sure exactly on how. That's the first thing, and that's why there is a need also to document properly. Where we are with that, because we don't know. There are lots of figures that are coming out, but in fact, nobody knows. I can't agree more with what Cécile Allegra was saying. I think here, almost all this discussion, I don't hear anything about, yes, the Libyan, what they are going through. First of all, there are lots of activists Libyan outside. When I heard, I'm sorry that it's the first time something is documented, I was really shocked by that. No, there are thousands of documentation.
There's been documentation, but not this kind of video footage. That's the difference.
I think the difference is why it is this video, and then it goes on CNN. Well, I can tell you there are other videos. The thing is that you are lots of activists, people who are working, and they cannot go forward public because they are in security situations that they cannot do that, but they're working. We didn't talk about, nobody talked about, what about the ICC, International Criminal Court? What about the issue of, yes, human trafficking? This is a huge human trafficking, and it's not concerning what the Libyan guest said. It's true. It's not a question of Libya. It's a question of Europe. And, last thing, I found it actually quite pessimistic, if not in a way funny, when you have the UN, international organization, saying that the European Union, regional or organization, criticizing what they are doing. There is a problem. We need to work together. The country need to involve themselves, to commit themselves, and find solution and stop talking. And this is very worrying because this is going to be worse and worse. And that's the problem.
Game Kibred, you're in London. Are you sensing that this video could be a turning point? We've heard Italy's prime minister and his predecessor who've been saying for a long time, hey, the rest of the EU has to help, the rest of the EU has to help. Do you sense that this video could be a turning point?
I think it may provide an opportunity in the presence of political will. Yeah. So far, we have been talking about the long-term solution to the Libyan problem of instability. It's good to do that. How about in the short term? There are people suffering, living under extremely dangerous situations. I think Europe needs to provide an opportunity for resettlement. The US has to join in, but more importantly, we also need to start screening in Libya between those who are fleeing because of poverty, economic hardship, and those who are fleeing persecution. You cannot return those who are fleeing from persecution to the countries where they risk being persecuted. Europe cannot be expected to host all those who are now in Libya. Some need to return to their countries of origin and need to be supported in rehabilitating or reintegrating themselves into their societies. But stopping these people without providing any opportunity for reintegration and those who are fleeing in search of protection to be protected. And if the US, which has a noble history of resettling those who flee from persecution, gets involved in a coordinated and planned way, I think there may be an opening for a limited solution, but that solution can only be provided if we can distinguish between those who are fleeing in search of food, and those who are fleeing in search of protection. Those who are fleeing in search of protection should be separated from those who are fleeing from poverty. Of course, the causes are interrelated. Poverty and persecution, they are not, there is no iron curtain separating between the two. They are interrelated. But those people who are fleeing from being persecuted should be allowed to be resettled either in the US, Australia, or Western Europe. Stopping people from crossing the Mediterranean without any discrimination is not a solution. It's quite brutal, and it contradicts Europe's long history of providing sanctuary to those who flee in search of protection.
Before we go on this point, let me bring in Lia Quartapelle. The next month there's going to be a summit of European and African leaders taking place in Ivory Coast's capital, Ivory Coast economic capital, Abidjan. What are you expecting from when you've just heard there Gaïm Kibraïd talking about, well, in some cases, those migrants should be going home, back to their countries. What are you expecting EU leaders to tell their African counterparts?
Well, I'd like, first of all, to make clear one point. It probably wasn't made clear before. I mean, Italy, it's not true that Italy didn't do anything and we're just pushing people at sea. Throughout these years, we saved 600,000 people. I mean, our Navy actively every day saved people that now are in Italy. So I think it's quite ingenuous, and it's not true to the facts that, I mean, Italy has been just a bad country pushing people and keeping them in Libya. It's really not the truth, and this is provoking a lot of problems.
And just very briefly, what are you expecting EU leaders to tell those African heads of state?
We would like to see an assumption of shared responsibility over there by European leaders. I mean, we put 3 billion, which then became 6 billion, for the EU-Turkey agreement to support Turkey having Syrian people stay there. Now, we cannot put 1.8 billion euros for the whole of Africa. We need more resources for what is called the Marshall Plan for Africa, with help to African countries in order for them to work with refugees in their own countries. I mean, we complain about the number of refugees coming to Europe, but Africa is hosting 90% of the African refugees all throughout the world. I mean, the burden is still very African.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Lia Quartapelle, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I want to thank you so much for joining us today from Rome. I want to thank as well Cécile Allegra in Tuscany, Gaïm Kibraïd in London, as well as Gouma El Gamadi in Milton Keynes, and Céline Bardet here in Paris. Stay with us. More to come on France 24.